The first 2010 inductee into the Hall of Fame is Morris Frank, who was the first person to use and promote the use of dog guides, as well as the founder of the Seeing Eye. Consider for a moment what you were doing at age 20. Perhaps you were working, studying, moving back into your parents' house, trying to find your future. When Morris Frank was 20, in 1927, he had already recognized the great idea that would be his lifetime commitment. He wrote a letter to Dorothy Eustace in Switzerland, who had published an article in the Saturday Evening Post about the use of dog guides with blind veterans in Germany. His letter ended, "I hope it will help the public to come to a clearer understanding, as we do not require sympathy but a laughing word and a pat on the back." This straightforward approach and humor equipped him well to become the man who was to be responsible for acceptance of dog guides as an option for independent travel for blind persons. Frank returned from Switzerland with his dog, Buddy 1. He was charged with the two goals of confirming the safety of traveling with a dog and convincing the public that this was a viable way to travel. He later described his first experience negotiating traffic in New York City with Buddy. Even in 1928, the city was a challenge. "She moved forward into the ear-splitting clangor," said Frank. "She stopped, backed up, and started again. I lost all sense of direction and surrendered myself entirely to the dog. I shall never forget the next 3 minutes. 10-ton trucks rocketing past, cabs blowing their horns in our ears, drivers shouting at us. When we finally got to the other side and I realized what a really magnificent job she had done, I leaned over and gave Buddy a great big hug and told her what a good girl she was." Frank worked with Dorothy Eustace to establish Seeing Eye in Nashville, Tennessee, and later it was moved to Morristown due to the difficulty of traveling in the hot, humid weather. He served as managing director of the Seeing Eye and as vice president of the Division of the Blind. In these roles, he visited students before and after they received their dogs, addressed many Lions clubs, visited with newly blinded veterans and ophthalmologists, and conducted countless radio interviews. After his retirement from Seeing Eye, he continued as an advocate and supporter of community ventures until his death in 1980. Morris Frank was nominated for the Hall of Fame by Dr. James Kutsch, the president and chief executive officer of the Seeing Eye, who regards Frank as his personal role model as well as a professional who convinced the public of the viability of dog guides. Dr. Kutsch, who will be accepting the induction plaque today, recalls meeting Morris Frank in 1970 and later in 1977 when Dr. Kutsch himself was training with his first two dogs. He recalled, "In 1970, I was 19 years old and had found very few role models about how to be successful as a blind person. Although the encounters were brief, they were memorable and contributed very positively to my views on blindness, my self-image, and my future direction." David Liu, now retired from Seeing Eye, commented in his letter, "Morris Frank was a walking, talking demonstration of real possibility. When given an audience, his story was bold, straight talk about his personal path to freedom, and the excitement of that possibility was ridden as a wave by countless numbers of blind people around North America." Morris Frank was a man of exceptional energy and commitment. His personal conviction laid the foundation for the widespread training and use of dogs among blind people. Along with Dorothy Harrison Eustace, he founded not only Seeing Eye, but also the entire dog guide industry, which now encompasses over 80 accredited dog guide schools around the world. If you visit the APH Museum, you'll find a new display on orientation and mobility that was developed by Michael Hudson, the museum director. It features a life-size photo of Morris Frank, as well as the harness that belonged to Buddy. Is it there, Michael? Oh, great. Okay, wonderful. It is a pleasure to include Morris Frank among the Hall of Fame honorees in our field. Accepting the honor for him is Dr. James Kutsch, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Seeing Eye. I'll hand you the plaque to take a look at it. Yeah, I'll just put it.
Oh, okay.
Pictures after.
Pictures after. Okay.
Yes.
Thank
We have the plaque that depicts Morris Frank's face in the bas-relief, as described earlier by Jim.
Thank you so much. It is a true honor to be here and a humbling experience to speak on behalf of Morris. As you just heard, I met Morris twice when I myself was newly blinded in training with my dogs. When you think about what Morris did, many people have the pleasure of creating a business, but he created not only a business, but an industry. And he was young. And this was a full decade before the long cane and orientation and mobility came on the scene. So think about this in today's world. Imagine a nonprofit going to have this discussion with your insurance broker. And the insurance broker says, you're going to do what with dogs and blind people? What about streets and crossings and what is this? We probably would not be here with dogs today if it weren't for Morris and what he did at the time in going around the country, in his drive, his passion for what he did. I can't speak for Morris directly, but what I do want to do is let Morris speak for himself tonight. And if you would indulge me in a short video, let me describe a little bit about what's going to happen in the video because it moves very quickly. The first part is audio described, and it's a lot of scenes of Morris as he is in Vevey, Switzerland, training with his first dog, and as he's traveling around the country promoting dog guides in the U.S. Later, we see Morris on a park bench when he was about 80 years old in Morristown, and he was being interviewed. So this is Morris himself speaking about the experience. Then a little more about him going around the country and some of the things he does. And then because his words are so profound, we'll close with Morris walking off the green in Morristown and repeating some of what he said about his experience. And at the very, very end, it transfers to a life-size statue on a traffic island right off the green in Morristown that commemorates Morris's founding of the Seeing Eye in Morristown. So if you'd please roll the video.
Of Morris Frank was taken from the archives of the Seeing Eye. We begin by seeing Morris Frank getting out of a car and going into Dorothy Harris and Eustace's house, Fortunate Fields in Vevey, Switzerland. Then we see Morris in a dark suit, petting and scratching Buddy with great affection before they return to the United States.
As I put my hand down on Buddy, I knew that she was going to be my Declaration of Independence and give me back the freedom that I so long desired to go and come as I pleased, and that she also would be the pioneer of the guide dog movement in the United States for the blind men and women who neither wanted charity nor pity, but wanted to live a normal life with normal people. And as they showed me how to put the harness on the dog, and we started down the road, as my legs stretched out, my shoulders went back, and my head went up, and the wind blew in my face, I knew I had my independence, and I knew the movement had to be a success in this country as it had been in Europe.
Here we see Morris Frank working with Buddy in training in Vevey, being led around a garbage can out in front of a house, crossing a street where Buddy slows and stops for an up curb, which Morris detects with a cane and then steps up. We see him saying goodbye at Fortunate Fields and getting into a car on his way back to the United States, where the work of Morris Frank and Buddy truly began. Morris opened doors for blind people all across the United States with Buddy One. Restaurants, trains, and here, even a United Airlines plane on Buddy's last trip. The work continued with Buddy Two. We see Morris Frank walking on the streets of New York City and getting into a train to the 1939 World's Fair. He gets off the Long Island Railroad at the stop by what's now Shea Stadium and goes onto the World's Fair grounds. The World's Fair symbol was the Trilon and the Perisphere. And we see him walking away from the Perisphere, coming towards us. The theme of the World's Fair was Dawn of a New Day. It certainly was.
And as they showed me how to put the harness on the dog, and we started down the road, as my legs stretched out, my shoulders went back, and my head went up, and the wind blew in my face, I knew I had my independence, and I knew the movement had to be a success in this country as it had been in Europe.
With me here tonight is Morris's grand-nephew. Did I get that right, Horton? Horton Frank and his wife, Kim. If you would stand, please. Speaking for the Seeing Eye, we are so pleased, so delighted with the recognition for the pioneering work that Morris did for all of us who are blind and all of us today who choose a dog as a means of mobility. We have come a tremendously long way since 1929, and I will say that I certainly believe Morris will hold his own in the field of, in the exhibit of leaders and legends in the field. Thank you all very, very much.
And could we have Carla and Kit come to the stage, please? Okay. Thank you. That was truly exciting. Did you ever think that we would hear Morris Frank's voice in person? The second inductee to the Hall of Fame is M.C. Migel. Before I prepared this introduction of M.C. Migel to the Hall of Fame, all that I knew about him was that his name was attached to a library and to an award. Those things alone have been important contributions to our field. Moses Charles Migel led a fascinating life. He was born in Houston in 1866, and as a child lived in Panama, Peru, and Chile. In early adulthood, he became a silk trader and started his own company specializing in fancy, expensive dress silks. He was an entrepreneur who could have done anything with his money. But instead of relaxing to enjoy his earnings, he became involved with the American Red Cross and became an advocate for blinded veterans returning from the war. In The Unseen Minority, Francis Kessler described him as the man who turned his unpaid labors for the blind into a second career of a long and colorful lifetime. The list of his service activities and legislative advocacy for blind people reads like a history book in our field. Without Migel, the book The Unseen Minority would have been bathtub reading. His accomplishments included assisting in the drafting of the Constitution and bylaws for the American Foundation for the Blind in 1921 and serving as its first board chair, distributing free radios to the blind, and beginning the first talking book program through AFB. Co-sponsoring the World Conference on Work for the Blind, the first international blindness event held on American soil, helping form national industries for the blind, helping start Helen Keller International, developing and supporting several laws supporting employment for blind individuals, including the Wagner-O'Day Act. M.C. Migel was nominated to the Hall of Fame by Carl Augusto, President and Chief Executive Officer of the American Foundation for the Blind. Carl said of him, M.C. Migel was a pioneer in his day, advocating for the blind and visually impaired during a time when the community was often neglected and even ignored altogether. His journey over the years influenced and contributed to every major program in the field of the blind until his death in 1958. In another letter, Susan Spungen, formerly Vice President for International Programs and Special Projects at AFB, mentioned Migel's wisdom in hiring Helen Keller as an employee of AFB. She stated, his hiring and his ongoing relationship with Helen Keller speaks volumes to his business acumen, as well as devotion to the person who soon would become spokesperson for AFB and the disabled population around the world. In addition to these letters, however, I found another compelling letter on the AFB website that was written to Migel in 1925. Annie Sullivan wrote to Migel to report that recent presentations by Helen Keller had not yielded substantial income to the endowment fund. They even had the same problems that we're having today back then. Miss Sullivan said, "I've never been a capitalist, so I find it difficult to sense what a capitalist's state of mind is when a pet investment yields a negligible dividend. Humanly speaking, you must have felt very disappointed sometimes and asked yourself if such large expenditure was justified by the meager contributions. Right here, I wish to say we have been much impressed by your attitude of patient waiting. Not once have you complained or showed by any sign that you were dissatisfied by our procedure." In Miss Sullivan's perception, her audience of one was an unlikely mix of patience and persistence in a man who understood the importance of money as well as the challenges of obtaining it. Migel was truly a visionary who understood what services would allow blind people to progress into jobs and independent lives. He knew how to attract public support to make necessary changes. This combination of abilities made him one of the innovators and leaders in providing services to blind people in the United States, and for that he is truly deserving of a place in our Hall of Fame. Carl Augusto of American Foundation for the Blind and Kit Migel, grandson of the honoree, will be accepting the Hall of Fame plaque for MC Migel.
Whoops. And I have no great prepared remarks, but I will make a few comments. One, he was a capitalist. But he was a man who, even when I was young, I knew he did not like limelight, and he didn't think people had to know where things came from. He insisted, though, that things get done, and he hated disorder with a passion. And I believe when he came back from World War I, he saw a number of things that just didn't make sense to him. And this was a guy who became the head of his household at 14 years old when his dad died, and he started making his fortune then. And so he never understood why things shouldn't be orderly. And when he came back and saw some of the issues facing people with visual impairment in the U.S., let alone the world, and having seen what happened in World War I, he could not understand why things just could not be more orderly. And so that's how I was brought up by my father. He was orderly, and we all got it from him. And I can't say other than he would look at everyone that I've seen over the last 2 days, and he'd go, "It's orderly, people work together, and you're all working for such a good cause," and that would make him, that's what would make him happy today. So thanks a lot. We're so proud of him still to this day, and it means an awful lot to my family. Thank you.
Thank you, Kit. Kit is already making so many contributions on our Board of Trustees, and we're really thankful for the legacy continuing. MC Migel was a visionary. First of all, he responded so positively to the call of the leaders of the blindness field to establish AFB. His first challenge was fundraising. So who did he call on? Helen Keller, who became a member of the staff. And she became a handful, as many of you know, but he was able to keep her in the fold, and she would say she kept him in the fold, over the next 40 years, when she, 35 years, when she worked with AFB and MC Migel. He was chairman of the board and a CEO at the same time. Wouldn't you like that to be done at APH, Tuck? Come on, chair of the board and CEO. That happens in the profit-making world. It just doesn't happen in the nonprofit world. He did that for 8 years until Helen raised enough money he could hire an executive director, and he had the foresight of hiring Bob Irwin, also a member of the Hall of Fame, who was a pioneer in his own right. A year later, Bob came up with the idea of talking books, MC Migel came up with the idea of the passage of legislation which established the National Library Service for the Blind. And Jane talked about the National Industries for the Blind, which provides employment for more than 5,000 people today. And nurturing the growth of NIB was his job. Also, the passage of the Randolph-Shepard Act, providing vending stand operations in federal facilities throughout the United States. He was a passionate advocate for. And finally, the establishment of the Blinded Veterans Association, where he started when he was in Europe, feeling empathy for the blinded veterans of the United States who fought in Europe. He helped to establish the Blinded Veterans Association. So you can see his impact was tremendous, not only in the work of the American Foundation for the Blind, but touching the lives of so many blind people through the establishment of other organizations and the passage of these laws. Thank you very much.
Jane, thank you for a wonderful job introduction. Jim, Kit, Carl, thank you for your acceptance, and welcome to our newest inductees to the 2010 class of the Hall of Fame. With that, I'd like to close the induction and turn the program back over to Tuck.
Jim, thank you for such a thorough, succinct presentation of the history of the Hall of Fame. Jane, for the eloquent presentations. And congratulations to MC Migel, his family, AFB and Carl, and also to Morris Frank, his family, Jim, and Seeing Eye. It's been a wonderful night, and we're just very proud to have this as an extension of annual meeting.